Welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh from The Wealth Stewards. In this podcast, Brent discusses some of the most important and interesting topics of the day as they relate to finance, the economy, and beyond. Now, on to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with your host, Brent Mekosh. Brent, how are you? Good to see you.
It's good to see you as always. I'm doing well. We're enjoying our first cool weather now in Arizona. Summer lasted a little bit longer than it normally does, and here we are at the end of October, and it's finally nice out. It was a very tough summer here in the state of Arizona.
Okay. Before we get into the serious stuff, let's compare cool, okay? Back here in the Northeast, we've already had a couple of frosts, which means 32 degrees, 33 degrees at night. We're running a little above normal here today. For the next 2 days, we're going to hit like 78, maybe 82 degrees. Okay. So where's that sit with Arizona?
Well, we were at 70s over the weekend, which was delightful. We'll be back in the 90s by the end of this week, though. So it's been a hot one this summer, and it's taken a little longer to break, but I think we're finally there.
The leaves back home are beautiful. And I say back home because I know you grew up in New Jersey. So just to let you know, the colors are looking phenomenal.
I absolutely really miss that. You can get up north and you can get where there's some scrub oak and some aspen trees and things like that if you get towards maybe 2 hours outside the valley here, but nothing like you have in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast.
Oh, no, and it's beautiful. It was beautiful. I was up at Mikey Stadium up West Point, and the trees are going. It is phenomenal. But speaking of phenomenal, anybody who follows you on LinkedIn like I do is aware that you and the family went to South Korea. So I'm curious. I have been in the Seoul airport to exchange planes. I have not ever been able to get out into South Korea. I have friends who grew up there, but you were there. How was it? And what struck you while you were there?
You know, it's a fabulous country. The whole family was there. So we traveled with our daughter who turned 4 while she was there. We did absolutely incredible because, 16-hour time difference. And I got to tell you, we've been back for about 8.5 days now, and I'm still not right. Pretty much. I'm waking up at 11 o'clock every night and not falling back asleep until like 3 or 3:30. So I'm hoping this is the week that the jet lag is finally done. But the country was fantastic. I think that it was far better. I was expecting to enjoy it, but it was far better than I expected. I thought the people, I've been to Japan a couple times in the past, and it's a very, very formal culture. Yeah. A little bit colder. I think a little bit maybe more difficult to connect with the people in Japan, although I think it's a magnificent country and I love it there as well. Koreans were very warm, and I think they genuinely appreciated visitors coming. They were eager to show you their country. The food was absolutely spectacular. The cities were immaculately clean. There's didn't see a single homeless person. Any crime rates are almost non-existent. Infrastructure's first rate, bullet train, ripping you around the entire country at 170, 180 miles an hour. Very modern, just a really wonderful country. We had a great time.
Yeah, no, it is really incredible. And in fact, South Korea is like the 10th largest economy. Am I right about that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the country itself is the size of the state of Kentucky. So it's not a big place. I think 50, 60 million people, something like that. Seoul has 26 million, which I think makes it the fifth or sixth largest city in the world. But yeah, it's a powerhouse. It's an economic powerhouse. And everything from obviously LG and Samsung, Hyundai and POSCO, big steel producer there. I mean, there's a lot of really, really massive companies that have a big, big footprint around the world. Busan, one of the cities that we went to, is, I believe, the fifth or sixth busiest container port in the world. And when you see this thing even from the highway, it is unbelievable. And just to give you an idea, Port of LA and Port of Long Beach, respectively, I think are like 17th and 18th in the world. And you could add them and you're still 30-40% less volume than what Busan is putting out there. Center of global trade, direct connections with 250 other ports around the world. And it's a powerful country economically for sure. And an interesting place given everything that happens in the north. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's stay with Busan for 1 second, though, because there is a contemporary link right now. But, we just temporarily averted a strike with the longshoremen. And one of the issues with the longshoremen here is that they don't want modernization of the ports. They really are against automation and modernization. And when you are at other ports, as I have been, and you were just in the one in South Korea, what you notice is the amazing efficiency of these huge ports and how well and smoothly they handle
Yep.
all of the flow in and out of the ports. Just amazing. It must have been something to witness firsthand.
It was, and to your point, heavily automated, because I do know that that strike, which was, I wouldn't say it was averted, but it's delayed. It's going to be
Right,
something
yeah.
that the next administration, whether it's the Harris administration or Trump administration, is going to have to come in and handle, because it's not over. But to your point, yeah, I know they're pushing back very heavily on automation. Our ports here, I know a little bit about that space just through some people that I do some work with. They're lacking a lot of efficiency that you have around the world. And I think part of the issue that we have here in this country is a lot of our infrastructure just is a lot older. I mean, when you look at
No.
the top 20 ports in the entire world, in the top 10, the vast majority of those are in China. You might get one or two from Europe. I think maybe there's one or two in Europe, I think, that are included in that, but it's basically China and in this case South Korea. But heavily automated, and man, can they move stuff around fast. And it's pretty unbelievable, the size and scope of these operations.
It is really amazing. So that having been addressed, I want to hear about your trip up north, because I am always fascinated. Sounds like a weak term. I'm always interested in the dynamic between North and South Korea and the extremes to which North Korea goes on a regular basis.
Yeah, so we did go to the DMZ, which is the demilitarized zone. It's very interesting because one of the things I think we take for granted here in the United States, and one of the reasons that I love travel the way I do, is many parts of the world are facing very different set of threats, and we've been fortunate that we've had some terrorism on our soil, but we've
Yes.
not had major war be on our soil. And a place like Korea, you're talking thousands of years of conquest. I mean, they've been invaded by Japan in some capacity. I mean,
Mhm.
several hundred times, and they were colonized by Japan. And you have waves of people coming down from the north, and just it's really been nonstop warfare on that peninsula for a couple thousand years. And of course, the most recent being obviously the Korean War, which never really ended. Technically, they're still at war. They're just in the entire city of Seoul, which you're talking 26 million people. You're within artillery range of the north, and as you're heading north to the demilitarized zone. The bridges, as the guide was telling us that you're traveling over, are all apparently wired with explosives in case the North Koreans come down, where they can just blow them, so that way you don't get the North Korean tanks rolling deep into the
Wow.
south. And so they're ready to go, and you do see a really robust military presence by the South Korean military. I believe it's mandatory. You've got your, I believe it's 18 months of service is what they told me, although I could be wrong with that exact number. So the young people are required to go in and serve the country in the military, and it's a constant state of alert up there. But it's an interesting thing to get into that DMZ, which is essentially a no man's land, where it's neutral territory more or less between the actual border. And it's a little creepy. It's a little creepy being there because talking about a lot of barbed wire, and there's a lot of guns pointed both ways.
I know, I know. You're right. I think Americans fail to grasp the reality that exists in a lot of other places in the world. I mean, we're obviously aware, but I don't think we understand the tensions and the realities of the Middle East. I
Yep.
don't think that we have any clue or understanding about the real tensions between Taiwan and China.
Nope.
And then you've got North and South Korea, which is, I mean, even for a non-Korean, it's sad because this is a country that is torn apart. And I know from friends who are Korean, this is a wound they are personally aware of.
Very much so. And the guide that we had that took us in the DMC, her father was from the north.
Mm,
And she shared a number of different stories that, like Hyundai, for example, if you have a Kia, if you have a Hyundai, the guy he's one of the wealthiest men or one of the wealthiest families in Korea, as you can imagine, massive conglomerate. They do all kinds of different things. But he had apparently left the north either before or right around the time that the war had occurred. And he stole a cow from his father and took it with him. This is the story that a couple of people in Korea told me, whether it's legend or whether this is the actual what occurred.
yeah.
This is what we were told. Went to the south, sold that cow. That started Hyundai. It started obviously this massive, multi billions and billions and billions of dollar conglomerate, but always had a tremendous amount of guilt because his father, of course, died in the north, and he wanted to make that right. And so there is a bridge that they've rebuilt over the river between the two countries. There's really no traffic on it now because you can't get to it. But when he did that, when things were kind of thawing a little bit, maybe 15, 20 years or so ago, he sent 1,001 cows back to the north to try to repay that, to assuage his guilt from stealing from his family and founding this country. But it is a deep wound because I think that they've got, occasionally you'll find some people from the north that find their way down there. They're completely, according to at least what we were told, lost when they come to the South because the South Korea is immensely competitive. I mean, the hours that these kids are in school and studying everything, any stereotype that you may have about Asian culture and academics, at least in the case of what I was told in Korea and what I saw there firsthand, and Japan and many other places in China. I've been to China before as well. It's totally true. These people absolutely, they value education and prize it so highly, and there's no tolerance for anything less than absolute achievement in that regard. But it's a fascinating place all the way around. The North was very interesting. DMZ was interesting. The day that we were leaving, there was some escalation between the North and the South, again, as there always is. Since we've left, actually, North Korea now has blown up some roads, which theoretically had, if the border ever opened up again, would economically, if not from movement of human capital as well, connect the North and the South, and symbolically blew those roads up. And while we were there, which I felt was interesting also, is, you're in Seoul, you're within artillery range of the North. It's a gleaming, modern, beautiful city. And you get these alerts on your phone in the morning. It's in Korean, so I basically do a screenshot on my phone, put it in the Chat GPT, and then it translates it for you.
Yeah.
But they are trash balloons, and so the North has sent since May. Our guide told us this, and then we actually saw a few flying and breaking over the city. They basically pack these balloons full of garbage, full of animal manure, full of probably some propaganda leaflets, and just sail them over to the South. And on their side, they're saying that the South Koreans are sending balloons over with K-pop tapes, and/or other propaganda leaflets, and they're also sending drones over Pyongyang now, which is the North Korean capital. So it's hot, and will it break out into something? You just don't know, and that's the thing. As Americans, you just don't know. You don't know when and if that's coming to your shores, and what it would look like. But there's people around the world that live with it 24/7.
Yeah, it is pretty remarkable. It is pretty remarkable. But speaking of tensions, I want to bring it back home for a minute because we have an election here which has, at least to my experience, an unprecedented amount of tensions on both sides. I'm not talking about on one side or the other. Brent, you must have clients come sit down in your office and say, "What is going to happen here, buddy? This feels different." And I don't know that it's any different. Okay. I remember really vividly, things that, probably a lot of you certainly wouldn't remember, which would be the tensions in 1968 and the riots. And when when literally people thought quite legitimately it was all going to come undone, but we're not back to that level yet. But what are you hearing from your clients, and what are your thoughts about what's going on in this country in terms as we head into the presidential election?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring this up because I had a client meeting last week and we were about 45 minutes into it, and the election had not come up, and it was probably and I joked with these clients. I said, we haven't even talked about the election yet. I was like, this is the first time in a couple of months it hasn't come up. I'll state by saying at first, my clients, they don't pay me to have a political opinion.
Right. No.
They do pay me to maybe have some insights on what may or may not happen. But
exactly.
there is a lot of an enormous amount of uncertainty. Is it new? Obviously what seems to be new is that we've got some violence around the election in terms of one, perhaps two or more assassination attempts on Donald Trump. But you think back, it's like, well, but you know what? Reagan was shot at and Kennedy was killed. And, so we've always had a little bit of violence around our politics. I think that, but this one here, it's back and we're seeing it firsthand. I think that from on the other side of the equation with Harris, this is a person that really never actually won a vote yet and was kind of, and it was kind of essentially just installed in as this person. And what I'm getting back from people, and again, we serve clients across the political spectrum, and usually in this case, I'll sit back and just sort of listen. But what you see on both sides, I think, if you lean left or lean toward the Democratic Party, I think that most were probably initially anyway happy that Biden was replaced, because I do think it became apparent to everyone
Sure.
that he was not capable of holding down this job. I think
All
to
right.
some of us it was apparent for a lot longer. But once that came out, and he still is the president of the United States today, by the way, which is interesting to consider. But
Yes, it is.
they were initially pretty happy that he was replaced, and you had somebody that was younger and brought a little bit more energy to the field. Now that obviously she's out there on the campaign trail, yeah, I think she's losing. This is my take. It's not a prediction, or it's not even personal preference. I'm not going there, but it seems to me that she's losing a lot of momentum. I don't think that recent interviews that she has done have gone particularly well for her. I think that the American people, generally speaking, are pretty bright, and they don't they can tell when they're basically just being told a talking point that doesn't really answer what the serious questions are.
Hmm.
So, but to that point, who's going to win this thing, who's not going to win it, or even the state of Arizona for that matter, I don't have a clue. And it's something that I usually feel like I have an okay finger on the pulse of. Like in 2016,
Yeah.
I had
Okay.
lunch with a buddy of mine in 2016 who definitely leaned a lot more to the liberal side, and was for sure going to vote for Hillary, and was hoping for that outcome. And based on just what I was getting back from clients, I'm like, but again, my subset of people here, sample size is very small, so you can't really put too much stake in it. But I said, I don't know. I think Trump might have a chance. And of course, he went on to win in 2016. With this one, I don't know, because what's interesting is there's people that you would think would be voting one way are not. But it's going both ways. There's people that think, well, this guy, of course, he's going to vote for Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and he's not. He's voting for Harris. And there's people like, well, historically they voted this way. They're definitely not going to vote for Trump, and they're voting for Trump. So, in terms of opinion about who's going to be better or not, I think I think the administrations between the two will look very different. And but I do think that what you find is that the size and the scale and the scope of what the federal government does, it tends to be so massive that any one, at least as things are set up now, any one president is going to have the ability to push different things in certain directions. But unless you start doing things like DC statehood or packing the court or some of the other things that are thrown out there, I don't really know that you're going to have anything necessarily revolutionary. So I think the fears that people have on both sides, you get people on one side of the equation. Well, Donald Trump comes in, it's the end of democracy, and the United States is over. And you have people on the other side. Harris wins, it's the end of the country, and the United States is over. And I don't really think we're that binary. I think that whoever gets elected, there's going to be some policy impacts for sure. There tends to be not much of a difference in terms of the performance of financial markets with Democrats versus Republicans. I think actually history gives a slight edge to Democrats in terms of what at least the S&P 500 has done. But to your point, things do feel slightly different now, because I do think we are in a slightly
Mhm.
different phase where there's a lot of hot spots in the world. We talked about just one of them, but still have got a very hot war with Russia and Ukraine. You've got things heating up now between Israel and the assorted Iran proxy groups, and what does that do? And China. Apparently, I read an article this morning where he's mobilizing more aspects of the Chinese military, and do they have an eye towards Taiwan or not? So there's a lot of hot button places around the world, and whoever comes in, I think, is going to have their hands full for sure.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts? I mean, you're in New Jersey, so we're a swing state here in Arizona, but you're in a deep blue state.
I'm in a traditionally deep blue state. I don't have a really good feel on it. I mean, if you want to know the truth, there are days when I get up and I have a running argument with myself. Do I just cash out of my portfolio? Do I just sell everything and go to the sidelines? I know from history and I know from past experience it's not a fruitful conversation nor necessarily a wise thing to do, because historically it's nice to remember that it honestly makes very, very, very little difference whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in office when it comes down to the markets. But yeah, like you, I just I don't have a handle on it. And I think the reason that it concerns me so much is for the reasons you just talked about. It feels like the world is on serious edge. And I will admit that it's a big prayer. Okay, but it's a big prayer. But I pray that we find our way as humans through this, and find a path to peace. And and then that's why I ask you, because this is an ongoing debate with me all the time.
No, and I'll tell you, a lot of clients have expressed that very same desire that you have. I'm just going to go to cash here,
Yeah.
or now at least you're getting some yield in the treasury market and the cash market, and just wait this thing out. The issue that you have there, and this is my response, regardless of either side, because I had people in 2016 when Donald Trump won that wanted to pull all their money out of the market, and that would have been a massive
mistake.
Same with Joe Biden. When Joe Biden was elected, this is going to be the end of things. And generally speaking, the financial markets, 2022 was a rough year all the way around. But even over the course of the 3.5 years, it's been pretty good. And the Trump administration was pretty good. So from a investing standpoint, there was a ton of opportunity out there. My answer to that is this. And so for listeners on both sides, and this answer I think applies to everyone. I don't care what side of the political divide that you're on here. Most of the people that are expressing deep concern about what is occurring, at least at the level of the federal government in the United States, that want to sell everything and go to cash. What you're doing then at that point is, who controls the currency? The currency really is controlled by the Federal Reserve, and also, of course, there's fiscal policy and everything else. But the dollars that you're holding, the value of that dollar is being protected by the federal government, the Federal Reserve. Now, history has shown they don't do a very good job at that. I mean, since 1913, I guess, when the Federal Reserve came into being, the dollar's lost about 98% of its value. So they don't do a great job at that. So I don't want to put my trust in those people. Where, the option is, of course, then you can buy some treasuries, maybe get a little extra yield, which we will do that all day long. Still like to stay on the short end of the curve there. But I'm buying something where we're issuing $2 trillion more of this stuff every single year. At some point, the levels of debt that we are adding needs to be addressed. And so, so I'm buying into something where they're creating a lot more of it, and history's going to determine at some point how much more rope we have. And I think we got a little bit more rope to get this thing under control, but it's something, relevant and worth considering. And the flip side is, one of the great things that we have the opportunity in this country to do is to invest in creativity and invest in ideas, invest in businesses. I mean, the fact that you look at a revolutionary device like any of the, in the case of NVIDIA, any of the chips that are powering all this artificial intelligence we have, or Apple, or even you go to your gas station, you fill up at Chevron, you have the ability to participate in human creativity, the growth of these companies, great ideas, and that, to me, is just more appealing than squirreling my money away. Now, I do think that there is absolutely a place. And the first place that we address if we're sitting down with a client is, what is that totally liquid, safe, protected piece that they need to have in place? And for some people, that the right answer might be 6 months of spending. Some people might be 2 or 3 or 4 years of spending, depending really on what's going on in their lives, what some of the bigger issues that they're dealing with are. But once you determine that number, whether this election, however it comes and goes and however it plays out, time is going to will solve most of the problems in the equity markets. I mean, the interesting thing is, when you look at financial markets in the short term, your more risky assets, equities and things like that are a lot riskier than, say, cash. You flip in about 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you go over 10 years, and actually cash becomes your riskiest asset, because basically all you're doing is guaranteeing you're going to go broke slowly. Because you're just not going to keep up with what the deterioration is of the dollar. So, I think that there's a number, to your point. It's never sell everything and wait till the election results, but there might be a number where you're going to sleep better at night, and there's some opportunity cost to doing that. The good news is, for people that want to be extremely conservative, the opportunity cost is a little less now than it was a couple of years ago, because you can get 4 3/4 on your cash, where you were getting nothing a couple of years ago. Interest rates have at least risen. It's hurt people in a lot of other ways, but at least it hasn't penalized savers as much as we had for a long time after the financial crisis.
No,
Did I convince you it's going to be okay? I don't know if I did that, but
no, but it is. That's the thing. Is the thing that I focus on, and I don't want to end it on this. I just want to raise this concern, because I think that it's not talked about very often, and it should be talked about a whole lot more often. Is that our national debt is at somewhere south north of $35 trillion. We're at like 120% of the GDP. So that my biggest concern right now is that neither candidate is talking about doing anything in terms of addressing that. And I know you don't win elections by saying, hey, guys, we're going to get the budget in order and get our house in good shape, because nobody votes for that, right? But it's like I have been wishing that I could hear a voice out there in the wilderness saying, "Yeah, there is a way, and here's what we're going to do." And and I think that at some point somebody's going to have to offer us that voice, and it may be members of these existing parties. I don't know, but do you think about that? Because I do.
You're touching on the thing that frightens me the most economically.
Right.
Is the level of debt that we have. Because, whether you're Ray Dalio, brilliant hedge fund investor, or David Goggins, who's kind of the legendary SEAL guy that does all these crazy ultra marathons, in both of their books, they mentioned that their rules, and they said it very differently, was that you have to accept reality, because reality is always going to win. Now, we're, again, like you said, 130, 140% debt to GDP, wherever we are right now, but they're adding a lot to it every single year. Japan's about 240%, so at some point there's going to be a reckoning. The question is that in 6 months? Is it in 10 years? Is it in 15 years? But the trajectory that we're on, it cannot be maintained. It can't continue. I think that's the voice in the wilderness. And again, it's not a pro or con, but it's a man that at least is talking about it, is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And he's offered, at least if we have a Trump administration that comes in, to look at efficiencies within the federal government. And this is a guy that's basically made putting a kilogram of material in space about 40 times cheaper than NASA ever could. And is a proven record of looking at, where the waste and redundancies are and everything else. Now, my issue is, and we have a global example now that's proven that you can do this successfully down in Argentina. Javier Milei came in down there, and it was actually probably the first politician in any country, maybe Bukele in El Salvador. It's kind of interesting what's happening in the south of our border. We got some really interesting people running countries.
Oh,
down
yeah.
there.
Yes.
But Milei came in, slashed about half the federal agencies, went from triple-digit inflation now down to low double-digit inflation. Property price, he lifted rent controls all through Buenos Aires. The cost of rent is plummeted by about 40%, because now you've got a massive influx of capital to build new apartment complexes and things like that. And so we're actually seeing, in Argentina is a big country, we're seeing real time what those more libertarian, which I largely have subscribed to, economic philosophies can do. And you saw it with Hong Kong versus mainland China, when China was a little different than it is now, but full on communist. You see it with North Korea versus South Korea. The more that we can embrace people's ability, capitalistic tendencies, and not to gum up the works as we do with a lot of these large federal agencies, I think the better. And there, I might ruffle some feathers here, but if you look, so many of these things that we have that government does for us, we think that they never existed before. Well, we didn't have the Department of Energy until the Carter administration. We didn't have the Department of Education until the Carter administration. You would argue that all the innovation that's occurred in the energy space, particularly around fracking, that wasn't the Department of Energy that did that. That was basically independent drillers and that figured that technology out. If you look at the Department of Education by any single metric, and this is not knocking on any teachers that might be listening to us, because you guys had to do a wonderful job in many cases, but all our numbers have gotten worse. So we send billions of dollars to the Department of Education, and education standards in this country have gotten worse and worse every year. So you're not getting what you paid for. And I think of Department of Transportation. Just came back from Korea, obviously, for about $12 billion. Now, again, it's a country the size of the state of Kentucky, but it's the 10th largest economy in the world right now. But they knitted up this entire country with a high-speed rail network where, I was in this train going 170, 180 miles an hour.
Yeah.
It's this little line they're trying to put in California. They think it's going to cost 130, 140 billion just to put a couple spurs in. They've laid a few hundred miles of non-functional track for $20 billion, and nothing's gotten done. You look at what SpaceX has done versus NASA. So I think that there needs to be a hard look at these different spending items. And to your point, it's going to happen. It's either going to be forced upon us. It's like, look at your own personal budget. If things get a little out of control with your spending, it's either get forced upon you in terms of making those changes, or you voluntarily do it. And the U.S. is going to have to. We're going to be in a position, again, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever that number is. I don't know when that's going to occur, but where reality will force us to make those decisions because the spending is just not, it's not sustainable right now. But that's my biggest concern as well.
I hear you. I hear you. And we've reached a point where we need to wrap this up. So I'll close it with this little fact that I read the other day, which blew my mind. You talk about efficiencies. For NASA to send a rocket into space, it's $4 billion. That's with a B. For Elon Musk to send a rocket into space, the one notably, the heavy duty rocket that he caught when it came back, is $100 million.
Yeah.
100 million.
Yeah, it's 40 times cheaper.
Man, I'll put my money on private capital markets every single time.
You know why, Bill? I'll leave you with this because the private markets can fail. And the issue that you have is I've always said this in the past, and obviously we need government institutions. We need somebody that referees the playing field. And I'm not talking about anarchy here.
Right.
But the one thing, if you look at any entity, it's in its DNA, it's in its genes, whether it's a person, whether it's an organization, whether it's a corporation, to grow. Everything wants to grow. That's just how this world that we're in is wired. And the private market, there's limits on that. If you're not operating efficiently, somebody else is going to come in and do it better, and you're out of business. I mean, it's just that simple. Where the issue is you have at the federal government level, or even state and local governments to a far lesser degree, but first of all, you've got a monopoly on the use of force. So you can look at your population, force them to pay you whatever you want to fund wildly inefficient projects, and if they don't want to do it, they don't have that choice. I can't decide. I'm not going to pay this specific gas tax when I fill my car up. I don't have that option. I can't say. You don't have that option. It's just
that doesn't exist.
Embedded in the system, and so and because of that enormous degree of power, you have to have people in there that respect the fact that there's this enormous degree of power, and very paradoxically don't want to use it, or want to use it incredibly sparingly. And it's tough. And I think that, to your point, I'll end with this, is that everybody, it's very easy. Everybody wants the government out of their lives and cut these programs until it's your program that gets cut. Right. Like even my father, for example, who's 85 years old, who I absolutely adore. We talked about Social Security. I'm like, yeah, you know what, Dad? I'm like, what if they cut your? Because he's a small government guy, kind of like I am. All right, what if they took away your Social Security? Well, no, not my Social Security. I paid that for years. I mean, I'm like, yeah. I said, but also, I said, for your entire voting life, you did vote and put politicians in office that are going to make sure that my generation is not going to have Social Security, at least in the capacity we have. They'll extend the retirement age, or they're going to means test it. They're going to do something to save it. They'll never make it go away. But everybody hates the government programs except for the government programs that they use. They love those government programs. So that's a push and pull. But I'm optimistic. I'll leave it with this. I'm going to leave it on an optimistic note. As all these things that we talk about are definitely concerns. I do believe fundamentally, you go around the world, there is no better place on the entire planet to be. There's wonderful countries, South Korea, which we talked a lot about being one of them. But Americans, I think Winston Churchill, and I've used this probably 10 times in our podcast already, said, you can count on Americans to do the wrong thing until they have to do the right thing. and through our history, you mentioned 1968, before my time. Obviously, I've been through a few of these crises myself, and I don't think that we're in crisis yet. I think that there's some things that could occur in the next couple of years that could put us in a crisis where we'd have to deal with things and make fundamental changes. But it does feel, to your point, but we'll agree that it feels like we're at a major historical inflection point. And I think the world's going to look very different in 5 or 10 years, whether it's technology that means that causes that change, or political winds that change that cause that change, or God forbid a major war, which typically happens at these big inflection points, which is obviously I pray every night that does not occur. But these are all real possibilities, and you know what? You got to keep playing the game is what it comes down to.
It's true. It's true. And as we wrap up this edition of this podcast, I'm going to close it like we always do, because I know that there are people who are listening, or I suspect that there are people who are listening who've not ever spoken with you before, who might like to have a conversation with you. What is the best way for them to reach out and initiate a conversation, Brent?
Yeah, you can find us online at tws.finance. Phone number in here is 602-255-0555. Either myself or remember my team will pick up on that. We're really active on LinkedIn, and try to post something up there almost every single day. And I do use that platform to communicate. So you can absolutely reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's me on the other side of it. I don't have a social media agency that's writing my stuff. It's all me, and I respond to it.
Is that some intern out there putting your stuff up on LinkedIn?
Nope, it's all coming from me. Even the one that I sent a few days ago at 1:30 a.m. because I was so jet lagged from this trip that I couldn't sleep. I'm like, I'll put something on LinkedIn. So, it's my only social
Why
media.
not? I'm awake anyway. Go ahead. Well, if you're not a subscriber to this podcast, if it's not clear by now, you should be. Okay. And that part you can remedy really quickly. And that's reach out and hit the follow button or the subscribe button. And then every time Brent drops a new episode of the podcast, you're notified and you can give it a listen. And the other thing that I would ask is if you like this podcast, if you find it interesting, maybe even useful, share it with people. Tell people about it. We'd love it. And word of mouth promotion is irreplaceable. I don't care what's going on in the social media world. Word of mouth is invaluable, and we would thank you for it. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Brent and everybody at the Wealth Stewards. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. And I want to remind you that you can go out today and make today a great day or not. It's your choice. Use it wisely. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Smart Money Simplified. Have questions about topics covered during the show? Visit our website at www.smartmoneysimplified.com or give us a call at 602-255-0555. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Wealth Stewards or concurrent investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.